There's a clock right up here.
Oh,
Very top. Okay.
we have a
Well, I
clock
want to
now.
thank you all for coming here tonight to Maranatha Christian Fellowship's event. We're doing Evolution Exposed, the science they don't teach you. And we're very excited to have the Nuttings on the campus here, Dave and Mary Jo Nutting, for 2 nights and one afternoon with us here. And we love bringing them out because they're scientists that used to be evolutionists, but now they're creationists, or as they put it, they evolved into creationists about 45, 50 years ago. And Dave is a geologist, and Mary Jo is a biologist. I call them the dynamic duals. Anyways, and so on a university campus, it's primarily taught what? Evolutionary theory. And so we want to bring the other perspective, and that is the supernatural God beginning, because we believe that science actually supports the biblical account of creation. And we don't believe in accidents. We believe that life has meaning and purpose, and without God, there's no meaning and purpose to life, because we're all just accidents then. So anyways, tonight you're going to get your ears filled with some wonderful knowledge presented here by both Dave and Mary Jo. And Mary Jo, the biologist, is going to start out tonight, okay? And so this is I think your 25 years you've been coming out here with us, something like that?
20?
Close.
Yep.
Yeah, close to 25 years that we've been bringing them out on campus. They're not only scientists, but they're grandparents. They have 2 sons, and they have 2 grandchildren, and might even have a few animals around too, I don't know. But they're very real people, very dear friends of ours, and we really enjoy them as friends as well. So anyways, without any more talk from me, we're going to get moving here. They're going to share for about an hour, I think, right, Dave? And then we're going to have some Q&A time here. And so save your questions for the end, okay? We'll let them get through their talk here, and then you save those burning questions you have, and they don't necessarily have to be pertaining to the presentation tonight. They can be just questions that you've been having and you would like answers, okay? So with that, let's give Mary Jo a warm welcome here as she steps up to...
Thank you, Jonathan. It's good to be back here in Mankato. And I actually grew up here in Mankato, and then I decided I wanted to go to the mountains, and I got to Colorado State University in Fort Collins and met a mountain man and stayed in Colorado. And so we've been traveling the world really for the last 40 years and teaching on this topic of creation and evolution. So tonight what we want to look at, was Darwin wrong about blind chance, or is it really grand design? And face it, Darwin didn't know everything, did he? We still don't know everything. In fact, I think the more that we know, the more that we know we don't know. And that becomes very real when we look at science. So many people think like I did, and I was taught evolution is science, but creation is just a religious myth. And so when students come to the university, they get only the evolutionary viewpoint, usually anyway. And but really, evolution is not science. It's a belief system posing as science. Now, why do I say that? Because science is based on observation and repeatable experimentation. And nobody can go into the past and repeat the evolutionary history of life over millions and millions and millions of years. And so we're taking and projecting from a little slice of time way back into the past with the evolutionary time frame. Really, evolution is part of the worldview of naturalism, which says that everything in the universe can and must be explained only through natural processes. In other words, the supernatural is just wiped out of the whole idea of origins according to the evolutionary viewpoint. So you're very familiar, I'm assuming, with evolutionary naturalism. That's what's being taught. Long time in the past, they tell us there was a big bang and that everything came about from nothing by accidents and chance, and that over time, molecules started developing, and over a long period of time, you get amino acids and other kinds of chemicals coming together to form the very first living cells. And from the first living cells all the way up through the tree of life that they would tell us until we get human beings. But what do we see is in most of the public school systems, another one in a science class normally. But there is another view, and it comes from a historical biblical view. The Bible is really a history book. It's not a science textbook, but where it touches on science, we believe that it is accurate. And we like to take Genesis 1 through 11. They're very foundational chapters in the Bible. If you look at Genesis 1 and 2, it's the creation account. And the Bible tells us that God created the heavens and the earth, it says. And then in Genesis 1, it tells us what he did each day of that creation week. Now that seems really strange to people that are totally indoctrinated into an evolutionary mindset. But we want to show you neither one of these two models can be scientifically proven. But what we do see when we look at the creation model is we can look at that model and see how it explains what we see in the world today. So from Genesis 1 in creation and Genesis 2, we see evidence of design in the natural world. Fantastic design in the creatures and so on. And we'll look more at that later here. Genesis 3 to 5 talks about what happened to God's good earth. At the end of that creation period, God said it is very good. We look around today and we see complexity and we see design, but we also see things aren't very good, are there? There's diseases, there's death. We see thorns and thistles. We see all kinds of problems in this world around us. But then in Genesis 6 through 8, we read about a worldwide event that is called the flood, a major catastrophic event. And what we see there is evidence all around the world, rock layers that are laid down under moving waters, many of them containing millions and millions of fossils. And we also see evidence of catastrophic erosion of those rock layers, like in the Grand Canyon. Dave will be talking about that on Thursday night, evidence of the flood. That's a great talk, by the way. I hope you can all come for that. And then Genesis 9 through 11 talks about what happened after the flood, as people were told to spread out and fill the earth, and yet they didn't want to do it. And so God confused the languages and people spread out over the whole earth as a result of what we see in Genesis 9 through 11. So that's a quick overview of the biblical account found in Genesis 1 through 11. Now, it's important to remember that your worldview can impact your interpretation of data. Science is data, right? I mean, if I have a rock here, I can weigh it, I can measure it, I can grind it up, tell you what chemicals are in there. That would all be the same whether you believe in evolution or if you believe in creation, the actual data. But how do we interpret that evidence? That can be impacted by your worldview and what you're willing to consider really as evidence. Tonight we're going to be looking at biological evidence and this whole idea that evolution simply means change. So the question is, how much change and what kind of change are we looking at? And then later on, we're going to look at some of the evidences given for evolution in the textbooks. So how much change are we looking at? Well, if somebody says, I believe in evolution, it's a good thing to ask, what do you mean by evolution? Are you talking about the idea that molecules can turn into man over millions and millions and millions of years? What we might call mega evolution? Or are we talking about the idea that we can get new types or body forms over history of life? Or are we talking about what we might call microevolution, or just an adaptation within what we call a created kind, within a basic type of animal or plant group? And so we can get varieties of frogs. They're still frogs. We can get dogs. Dogs are always dogs. They don't turn into cats. They don't turn into anything else in actual observable science. And we know that most of the domestic dog breeds have come about by mankind's selective breeding in the last 200-300 years. And so we can get all sorts of dogs. We can say variation, yes, but evolution, no. These things are not, these dog breeds are not coming about because of simple mutation plus natural selection. They're coming about because humans have gotten involved in breeding experiments, and we come up with all sorts of dogs. It's our contention that most of the evidences that are given for evolution are these simple kinds of changes. Changes within a kind, and not from one kind of thing to another kind of thing. So we see a whole lot of variation, but not evolution from one kind of thing to another kind of thing. We look at the finches, Darwin's famous finches from the Galapagos Islands. On his voyage around the world, he went and observed these finches, and he saw different sizes and shapes of beaks on these birds. He supposed that the ancestral pair of finches had come over from South America, and those variations had come about over time because of natural selection. Well, when we look at the actual finches, what do we see? We start out with finches, and what do we end up with? Finches, all different sorts. We get different beak sizes and so on. Now, there's been research going on these finches for over 70 years. One couple that has devoted their life to studying these finches. And what they found was, yes, indeed, there is variation. And when there's periods of drought, the beaks tend to be stronger, and they have to go and be able to crack the hard seeds and so on. And so with drought, you get a different kind of beak shape and size than you do when you have wet years. Is that evolution? That just goes back and forth between the stronger beaks and the other beaks. And so what we're seeing is, yes, adaptation to changes in the environment, but what causes that adaptation? There's been so much study done on it now. Some of the scientists today are looking at this evidence, say those changes come about due to epigenetics. Now, that's a biological term. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but epigenetics is the idea that there are chemical markers that are attached to the DNA molecule. And so these markers will help that organism to adapt to changes in the environment without changing the DNA. So it's more like it just turns on a switch or turns off a switch. It's kind of like a thermostat in your home. You know, you can set it a little higher, and when it gets too cold, it'll kick on the heat. What we're finding is that these systems are able to actually read the environment and kick on or off different genes as needed. That's different than random mutation, which are mutations are accidents or mistakes, right? It appears that these design systems, control systems, have been built right into these organisms. Here's a quote by Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins. He says, "Scientists have discovered that the genes are very similar among the various species of finches. They discovered that epigenetics correlated closely with the beak shape and size among species. Epigenetic mechanisms clearly remain a major player in adaptation." And I'm really excited about this research. I mean, I love to study the DNA, you know, and it's complicated enough to see the A, T, C, and G and how all that's translated into proteins and so on. But when you add on epigenetics, it complicates everything so much more. And it gives you a means to test the environment and then make changes within those organisms based on what they're finding in the environment, not upon random mutations, but on actually an engineering system, it looks like. So 40 years of research, beak size changes with periods of drought. And they're thinking now that that might be due to adaptive epigenetics, and that's current research going on. Peppered moths have been one of the classic evidences of evolution that's been used for many, many years. The idea was that there were these moths around in Great Britain before the Industrial Revolution. And they say that after the there were more light-colored ones before the Industrial Revolution. Then they say the air became polluted with soot, the tree barks became dark. And when it was clean, the light-colored moths were very well camouflaged, and so the birds could pick off the dark-colored moths more. So you had more light-colored moths. Over here, the dark ones fit in better and are better camouflaged, so we had more. The birds could eat more of those, and we ended up with more black ones. They call that thing industrial melanism. But the thing to think about with it is, what did you start with? Started with moths, light ones and dark ones. And what do you end up with? Moths, light ones, and dark ones. Nothing fundamentally new. And they have done some additional research on this and found out that the original photographs and drawings were not really, they were fudged a bit because they had to stick those moths onto the bark of the tree to get the pictures in the textbooks. Generally, these moths will fly around at night, and in the daytime they hide up in the leaves of the trees. And so it may be a bogus thing. But then again, just some modern research coming out is showing in some kinds of animals that it can actually be due to environmental toxins, that their look is going to change. We don't know that about this, but it's current research that's being proposed. And so we'll see what happens with that. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria, that's a big one today, isn't it? And we talk about antibiotic-resistant viruses and so on. And you hear about people that become like the MRSA drugs, or the bacteria that are resistant to certain kinds of antibiotics. What do we do with that? Where did that come from? Is it mutation plus natural selection? Possibly, but if you think about it, you take a petri dish and you throw it and you grow some bacteria on there and you put on some antibiotic. Some things are likely going to survive and some won't survive. The ones that survive can go on and reproduce. And so now the population as a whole becomes more resistant to that antibiotic. But the point is, you start with bacteria, you end up with bacteria of the same sort, nothing fundamentally new. Now, are these variations also perhaps built in from the very beginning, the ability to adapt and change according to the environmental conditions? I don't know yet. This is current research. And so stay tuned. We'll see what happens there. But what we see is variation, yes, but not evolution, not the kind of evolution that could go all the way from molecules to man. Yeah, this is not the type of evolution that involves goo turning into you by way of the zoo, is it? What about Darwin's ideas about the races, the origin of the races? Darwin thought that the different races came from different lines of apes and monkeys. And, and that from there, some of those lines were more highly developed than others. And he said that those, which of course he then said was the white race that was more highly developed, since he was white, and colonial England, Great Britain, going and colonizing in Africa and so on. Is it true? We actually had some of our staff that went to Africa, and they were doing presentations in Africa and to a whole big group of pastors. And one of these pastors came up and said to our speaker, "What line of apes or monkeys do we come from?" Well, our speaker was able to say that was Darwin's old ideas. We can show you how in one generation we can get all the way from lightest light to darkest dark. I'm going to go ahead a little bit here. We can go all the way from lightest light to darkest dark skin color in one generation if you start with the right combination of genes. Now, if we would take only these children up here from the result of these two parents, the next generation would have all black, very black, or if we down here, very white, but we can get all these variations in between demonstrated with a simple Punnett square, which some of you remember from biology classes. Some of you like these things, others of you hate those things, right? I think they're cool because it really does show how we can do with a mixture. We got to know about a man from the Bahamas, and Bahamas, yeah. He's a black man, and the whole area was like 96% black, but they had white teachers from Great Britain come in to teach in those areas. And this guy, when this guy, Dr. Miles Monroe, was 14 years old, his teacher said to him, "Oh, you're never going to be able to learn. You're uneducable because you're not evolved far enough." He went home and he told his mother that, and she says, "Don't you ever talk that way." Well, this 14-year-old decided, well, if this teacher thinks I can't be educated because my skin is black, and I'm not as highly evolved as these white teachers, if that's the case, then he decided, that guy's not going to educate me, I will educate myself. He took the textbooks, he started studying them, and within 6 months, he went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. He proved him wrong. Years later, this man became quite a leader in leadership development, very well known. And he was at a book signing event in Great Britain long after that, when he was a lot older. And here he is signing the books, and this old gentleman comes up to him with a very tattered book. It was his book. He wanted him to sign it. Come to find out, that old gentleman was his teacher that had taught him way back when he was 14. And Miles Monroe got up from behind the table, went over and gave him a hug. But he said, "Do you still think I'm uneducable?" Didn't work, did it? But you see how Darwinian evolution impacted, together along with white colonialism, impacted the very identity of people. We had a pastor when one of these pastors in Africa, after he found out, wait, we can get all the way from lightest light to darkest dark in one generation. You guys don't come from any different kind of monkey or ape. That was an old, outdated idea. These pastors got up and just started praising God because now they had some truth, and they had been kept down. They had been kept down in their lives because of an old idea that was not true at all. Darwin did not know about Mendel's work. I wonder if Darwin had known about Mendel's work, which actually was published just a few years after Darwin's work, if Darwin would have not come up with his ideas, because Mendel's work explained a whole lot about what Darwin was trying to explain. And yes, here it shows you can get maximum variation. You can get from lightest light to darkest dark in one generation. Look at this. These are twins. Same parents. Medium skin colored parents. One very light, one very dark. And you can see when they're grown up a little more. Now you can do that with simple genetics. You can demonstrate how that can work. We think that the various things that we call races or skin colors came about sometime after the time of the Tower of Babel, as people were spreading out to different places all around the world. And then within family groups, you could begin to have various characteristics cemented into a group very quickly after that. Well, here's a question. According to evolution, how do you get new genetic information? Because you got to produce it from someplace, don't you? Darwin didn't know. He accepted a form of Lamarckianism, which is the inheritance of acquired traits. He wasn't sure how to get new information. He really didn't know about mutations. Neo-Darwinism, or this is what's come since Darwin's time, added in the idea of mutation. And so now, the idea of evolution takes place by mutation plus natural selection. Mutation supposedly generating new characteristics, natural selection supposedly weeding out the bad ones, saving the good ones. It's a long, long process, though, according to the evolutionary models, to go all the way from molecules to man by those things. Interesting, though, neither mutation nor natural selection can create anything. I mean, if you're going to mutate a gene, you've got to have a gene there already to mutate. It can't create a gene. And what about natural selection? It can only select what's actually been produced, right? I mean, if you go out and somebody offers you orange juice and apple juice, take your pick, you can't get grape juice out of that. I don't care what you do with it, you're not going to get grape juice, are you? So they can only operate on things that are already in existence. So then the question is, what do actual observations show about mutations? Because remember, science is based on observation and experimentation. Well, mutations can produce things like two-headed snakes and cattle with extra legs and roosters without any feathers, all sorts of fruit flies. Some with no wings, some with 4 wings, some with curly wings, some with different colored eyes, and so on. Lots of different variations, but they're still what? Fruit flies. They don't change into anything else. And in fact, most of these would not survive in the wild, which is what natural selection then would say, okay, so we wipe out any of them that couldn't survive, and we only save the good ones and go from there. But the question then is, are there enough good mutations to drive this thing forward? Well, that was an idea of faith, really, not evidence. We know we can get duplication of information by mutation. We know we can get loss of information. So you might get a fly with no wings. Deregulation of genetic information, like happens in cancer cells, or you can get aging and death coming about from mutation. But can you get enough good ones to go all the way from molecules to man? I don't even know how many that would have to be. It has to be phenomenally complex, wouldn't it? In general, you know, we all know mutations are harmful, or they seem to have no immediate effect. Otherwise, we should be doing more nuclear testing, right? So that we can generate more mutations and generate that evolutionary process. Well, Dr. John Sanford is a geneticist, and when he started his genetic research, he started out looking at mutation and natural selection. And as he did his research, he became very concerned about it, saying it doesn't work. He's a retired Cornell University professor. He was one of the co-inventors of the gene gun process, which is how we sequence DNA molecules. And so he knows a whole lot more about genetics than I do. He wrote that book called Genetic Entropy. Now, genetic entropy just means the downward trend because of the buildup of mutations in organisms. But at the end of his research, he's going, evolution does not proceed by mutation and natural selection. It doesn't work. If you're interested in that book, you can order it from us at AOI or get it someplace else. But his research was very important. At the end here, he says, careful analysis on many levels consistently reveals the primary axiom is absolutely wrong. Now, what's he calling the primary axiom of evolution? It's the idea that mutation plus natural selection will drive this evolutionary force forward. But he says it's absolutely wrong. Then he says this, if mutation and selection can't prevent the degeneration of a genome, then the primary axiom is wrong. Now listen to these words. It's not just implausible, it's not just unlikely, it's absolutely dead wrong. It's not just a false axiom, it's an unsupported and discredited hypothesis, which can be confidently rejected. So what's he saying? You're being taught that evolution proceeds by mutation and natural selection. At least Dr. John Sanford says that's wrong. It doesn't work. And so I would think that would cause students to want to do a little more research and to see what's actually going on there. There's a new idea that's being put forth now by some creation scientists who are doing actual research on various organisms. And that's the idea of continuous engineering tracking. And what do we mean by that? Well, that's this idea I was talking about before, that the organisms can change according to environmental conditions. And it doesn't take millions of years. It's not based on mutation and selection. Some of the latest research coming out to explain adaptation is it's not normal adaptation as much as it is pre-engineered design to respond to environmental changes. Now that, to me, engineered, I don't know, are any of you guys in engineering? Yeah, what is engineering? I mean, you know that if you get a system to work, right, and you introduce random changes into that system, it's not likely to work better, is it? It's likely not to work at all. And so random changes in orderly systems can't explain what we actually see in nature. They're at the Institute for Creation Research, they're doing primary research on blind cavefish. And they are using this as a model system to test this idea of continuous environmental tracking and adaptive engineering. And here are some of their observations so far on that. The cavefish has many differences from equivalent surface fish besides sight. So it's not just that they can't see. But then they said the changes appear to be controlled by water pH, not by darkness. Now that's different. And changes can be reversed when put in a normal surface environment. Wow. You know, that's not what we would have been taught by mutation plus natural selection. We've been told the fish become blind because they live in this dark area and they don't need their eyes, right? But when you go back and actually do some of the real research, you find out that things are not as they always might have seen at first. These observations are not consistent with evolution, but they align with this pre-engineered model. So stay tuned to that. There'll be more research coming out. So when you look at the mechanism of evolution of mutation plus natural selection, you can just say, no, it doesn't work that way. You can't explain the origin of new kinds of living things by mutation and natural selection. So here's another big question. Where do you get life in the first place? Of course, the evolution model says that there was this big bang and somehow we get chemicals coming about, amino acids and other kinds of chemicals. They get together to form bigger and bigger substances. And finally, you get the very first living cell, right? And from there, we get all the life we see in the world today. Does it work? Well, nobody's ever observed that, have they? Nobody could observe it. This is evolutionary speculation. What's one of the first laws of biology that you get in a biology class? Life comes only from life, right? It takes a living thing to produce a life. And that is observational science. And so in this way, scientific observation says it took life to begin with. It couldn't just come about by accidents and random chance. This is more speculation. I like this quote by Franklin Harold. He says, "We should reject as a matter of principle the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance necessity." So he's showing there his worldview, his bias. He said we should reject the idea of intelligent design. But then he says this, we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations. Is that science? Not really. Science is based on observation and experimentation, right? So that's not science. So when we look at this whole idea of change and the mechanism of change, we can say, no, mutation plus natural selection is not sufficient to explain the kinds of change that would be needed for evolution to occur. What about similarity? This is the idea that's oftentimes put forward as an evidence of evolution, that if two things are similar, that means they had a common ancestor. Well, is that always the case? Here they show the diagram of the man's arm and the dog's leg and so on. They show the similarity in the bone structures. They see that proves that we had an ancestor in the past that was similar. You know, we're seeing similarity here, common ancestry. But that's not the only explanation for why things could be similar. Maybe things are similar because they were designed for a similar function. And so what we're seeing is variation on a theme. Or maybe they're similar because we had the same designer. It's like if you go into an art museum and you can pick out the Rembrandts by the use of style and texture and you know, the style of the artist. And so maybe that's why they're all the same. Or maybe they're all the same because they were designed to work together. They all have to live in the same universe, don't they? I mean, chimps and apes, what do they breathe? Same air we breathe. What do they eat? Basically, same kinds of food we eat. Wouldn't you expect some similarity? Based on, again, on engineering principles and physical constraints. This idea was put forward by Ernst Haeckel. He was called Darwin's bulldog, and he drew these diagrams showing how similar the little embryos are from the fish all the way on up to humans. And that was the idea that was called the biogenetic law, or ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. That's a big mouthful. But it just means that as that little baby develops inside of the mother's womb, that it would repeat the stages of evolution at a much accelerated rate. Well, is that true? Then they'll show you things like, well, that whole idea has been disproven a long time ago. But they still show things like, oh, look at the gill slits and the yolk sac and the tail. That looks very similar, they'll tell us, to the development of a fish. But first of all, in humans, these are not gill slits. They're not gills, they're not slits. Why call them gill slits except trying to show us how similar they are to our fish-like ancestors. The yolk sac in humans does not contain yolk, doesn't need to. It's used for building the first blood cells till the baby's big enough to make the blood cells in the bones. And the tail here looks like a tail. It grows a little more quickly than the rest of the organism at this point in time. Later on, it just becomes enclosed in your body's end of your spinal column. It's not a tail, is it? And so all these things that were called leftovers from evolution, they're really not leftovers at all. They're very important points in human development. The similarity that they're studying a lot today is biochemical similarities. And what they're seeing here is looking at the sequence in the DNA molecules, or looking at the sequence of amino acids in proteins. And the idea is the more closely related things are, the more similar that their chemicals are going to be. Then you see claims like this come out in popular magazines, you know, and people think, oh, that's been proven. Well, what they said, chimps and humans share almost 99% of their DNA. Is that true? Well, as they've been doing more research, they're finding that number has been going down drastically. It went down to 93.6%. It's coming down, down, down. Here in May of 2025, they said 84 to 85% similarity. What does it mean anyway? Again, we would expect some similarity, and yet we would expect differences because apes, chimpanzees are different organisms than human beings. They're distinct. And yet in October 2024, it still shows 98% similarity, according to Evolution at Berkeley. What's going on? They're not up to date on those data. And then again, the mouse, they say, is 97.5% similar to humans. So you all like cheese? Maybe we came from mice instead of apes and monkeys. Zebrafish is 92%. I love this one. Bananas, 50% similar. So maybe we came from bananas. What does it mean? It just shows that we have similarities because it's all based on DNA, right? Those 4 nucleotides, basically. They knew this for more than 25 years. Biologist Michael Lynch says clarification of the phylogenetic, or that's the evolutionary relationships of the major animal phyla, has been an elusive problem, with analyses based on different genes and even different analyses based on the same genes, yielding a diversity of phylogenetic or evolutionary trees. Wait a minute, you study the same gene and you're going to come up with a different tree of life? That doesn't make sense, does it? And then even back further, clear back in 85, 40 years ago, Michael Denton wrote this book called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. He said the really significant finding that comes to light comparing protein amino acid sequences is that it is impossible to arrange them in any sort of evolutionary series. Then you see things even more recently. This came out in 2009, Uprooting Darwin's Tree, cover of New Scientist magazine. It said Darwin was wrong, cutting down the tree of life. In that article, they showed a sketch of the tree of life that Darwin first put. He just drew it out in his journal. Look what he says up here. I think, just an idea he had. He was proposing it. Is it true? Well, they said in the article for a long time the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life. A few years ago, it looked as though that grail was within reach, but today the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. The tree of life, one of the iconic concepts of evolution, has turned out to be a figment of our imagination. So what's it doing in textbooks and museums and so on? What does it take to get some of this stuff out that has just been passed on one generation to the next to the next? They said this in this article: we have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality. And that's based on more modern DNA studies and so on. They said biology is vastly more complex than we thought. And facing up to this complexity will be scary. Well, I don't think it's scary. I think it's exciting, actually. The more that we study living things, the more we understand the complexity of life, the more we see it couldn't have just happened by chance and accidents. So real science is cutting down Darwin's tree, and that's what we see happening. So similarity, we can just say no. There are other explanations to similarity. That doesn't prove evolution. What about this idea of junk? This is the idea of vestigial organs, things that were left over from our evolutionary past. At one time, they had a list of 180 different things in the human body they said were vestigial. They don't have as much function as they used to have in the past. Things like pituitary gland, thymus, tonsils, appendix, wisdom teeth. They had all kinds of things on that list. Now we know pituitary gland is involved in regulation, oftentimes called the master gland of the body. It's not junk. It's not just leftover from evolution. It has a very important role in humans. Thymus, tonsils, appendix are all used in immunity. Wisdom teeth are used in, chewing, just like any other teeth. Now, sometimes they become impacted and maybe the jaw development wasn't big enough and they have to be removed. But just because something can go wrong with it doesn't mean it didn't have a function in the first place. It just that the development hasn't gone quite normally. This is the one that was used a lot, was the idea of junk DNA. At first, they came out with this they said 98 to 99% of the DNA molecule is junk. And we said, go back to the lab, go do some more research. We predict that you're going to find out it's not junk. And fortunately, this did not take hundreds of years to show. And even now, 2012 Discover magazine says the key point is it's not junk. There was this ENCODE project they did. Over 300 genetic researchers involved in this project internationally, and they were looking at these sections of DNA that were called junk, and what they ended up showing was they're not junk at all. They have very, very important functions. They said almost every nucleotide is associated with a function. The metaphor of junk isn't that useful. And here's some of the functions of this non-protein coding sections of DNA. Repairing DNA, assisting in DNA replication, regulating DNA transcription, aiding in the folding of chromosomes, aiding in the maintenance of chromosomes, controlling RNA, editing and splicing, helping to fight disease, regulating embryological development. It's not junk. If it was, we wouldn't even be here. It's got all these functions, and there are dozens and dozens of articles coming out about these areas that were called junk DNA. So no junk, human genome, 20th anniversary, junk DNA hits the trash. And so we can just dismiss this idea of junk. Now, that doesn't mean that something can't go wrong with an organ. It could go wrong with an organ, right? Something might happen to your heart. Does that mean your heart had no function to begin with? Not at all, does it? So things can go wrong in systems that are highly coordinated, but to get a better system by accidents and chance just doesn't work. The last one here, imperfection. Think about your eye and the wonderful complexity and the design of your eye. Charles Darwin said, "To this day, the eye makes me shudder." He knew that his theory of evolution by natural selection could not explain complex structures like the human eye. And yet Richard Dawkins recently has said, no, it's just absurd design. Your eye is an absurd design. He says if your eye was designed differently, you could see better. But what he forgets is if the eye was designed the way he says it should be designed, if you went outside on a bright sunny day, you would be blind within a couple of hours. I believe our Creator made our eyes phenomenally. And we are fearfully and wonderfully made, as the scripture says. The evidence cries out, created with a design. And I believe that that's true. Dave's going to come. This is one of Dave's favorite little organisms, the morpho butterfly that you find in Costa Rica and other places. The very first time we went to Costa Rica, Dave wanted to see a morpho butterfly up close. So I started praying, Lord, let him see one up close. It landed right on his wrist. And then it landed on his beard. I said, is that close enough, Dave?
That was close enough. Boy, that was sure fun. Thank you, Mary Jo. Really. Yeah, the blue morpho is an amazing example of design for sure. But it is not blue. You say, what? It looks blue to me. Nope, it's not blue. Here's the underside of the blue morpho butterfly right there. And when you look at the actual top, you find out that the blue scales are actually not blue. They're clear, very clear. So how does it get that blue color? Well, the scales have millions of precisely spaced layers called laminae, and the regular light beams come in, shines down through everything, and all of the spectrum is filtered out except the blue. But now it's not just reflected back as blue light, it is magnified back with a big emphasis on magnification. So an airplane pilot from the air can see a group of those things on the ground. It's an amazing amount of intensity. And these things have to be precisely spaced, otherwise this thing doesn't work. God's design is absolutely amazing on that, okay? Well, naturalism will say, well, we can imagine how mutations, mistakes, and natural selection acting over millions of years might refine or produce systems. Well, guess what? Two words here are not science words. Imagine and might. That is the hope of naturalism, right? We hope we can figure something out, but we're not going to even go there yet. All right. Every one of the naturalistic explanations, whether I'm talking about this particular creature or the amazing design, or what about your human brain that is actually better than my computer? Did you know that? And it works faster, multitask more. Or a bombardier beetle can mix two chemicals together and out pops an explosion into the face of an approaching frog at 212 or boiling hot water temperature. It's amazing. And that little beetle has to have the right chemicals, has to have storage compartments, mixing chambers, explosion chambers, several sets of valves, all working and operating at exactly the same time. Otherwise, you got a dead beetle, probably. Okay? This is evidence of design. But every one of these evidences, okay, the naturalistic explanation is the hero of the time are millions and millions of years coupled with natural selection. Natural selection is very important. But what did Mary Jo say? Dr. John Sanford said, well, natural selection, it doesn't work. Mutation and natural selection does not work, okay? Especially in the larger genomes, okay? So he says, forget it. You can confidently reject it. All right, when I look at the DNA molecule, that's a computer program inside of every one of your cells. Did you know that? A computer program doesn't happen by accident, does it? And you can't build a total complex computerized program by accident starting from one little command or something, can you? Nope, you can't do it. You're going to have the whole sequence. And if a 2-year begins typing on your program that you've been working on for a month and randomly puts things in, what's the chance it is going to get better? Not. Okay? Mutations won't work. Oh, that's the first thing. But when you look inside the cell, do you realize you have motors on the sub-microscopic level? Motors, machines, etc. You can't even see them with a standard microscope. You have to have sophisticated processes with scanning electron microscopes, very high quality ones, in fact. That's the only way you're going to know what's going on inside every one of your trillions of cells. There are motors. This one's going to produce energy, okay? They're real machines, okay? And in humans, there are over 20,000 types of molecular machines. Did you get that? 20,000 types in humans. And they are, what? Real machines. And there you have folding machines, pumps, valves, force generators, energy producers, labeling machines, delivery, UPS, and more. And you have highway construction going on inside your cell. Did you know that? I just want to give you the big picture of that aspect of it. What's going on inside that cell? Okay, let's suppose we want energy. That's going to take this machine right here. That's an energy producing machine. This one, it's called the synthase machine, but it takes 32 proteins just to make the assembly of this thing. So you have to have a way to get 32 of the right kind of proteins all stacked up in exactly the right order, and it's going to be grinding like this. And it's going to produce energy. It's amazing. It's a very sophisticated machine, okay? But anyhow, it's powered by protons, and it'll be eventually spinning so fast, 9,000 revolutions per minute. So you see, it's more complex than our best machines right now, right? Very much so. So how does evolution explain it? I don't think it can. I'm going to show you this because I don't believe naturalism can explain this type of complexity. So you have to have your computer program. Your computer program is going to code for a specific protein that's going to be needed in that energy machine, right? It's going to, it has to do 32 of them, but that's okay. But here's the piece that codes for that one particular one. You got to take a copy of it because you don't want to use the original. You take a copy. Now you got to unfold that. You got to get to the right spot. You take that copy. Now, did you realize you have manufacturing plants inside your cell? It's called the ribosome for you biologists. Okay, there's the polka dots on that nucleus. The The UPS delivery takes it in there, puts it into that little assembly plant. And what happens is that assembly plant is going to take the instructions, the computer instructions, and let's see, okay, we need a purple bead here, we need a red one here, we want a green one, okay? And it's like a chunk, 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 out pops this protein. You got that? That sounds so simple, right? Remember, it's working on the microscopic level. Now, guess what? Just because you have a string of proteins doesn't mean it's going to work. You now have to move that into a folding machine. If you want to know the technical terms, talk to me later. Better yet, talk to Mary Jo. But anyhow, you come into the folding machine. It's got to be precisely folded. Now, once it's folded, it can go in and become one of the proteins necessary for that 32 protein energy machine. Okay? Sounds good, doesn't it? But how do you get it there? Call UPS. Right? Okay, you call UPS. And here comes UPS. Now, in order for UPS to work, you have to have a highway. I'll bet you most of you didn't know you had highways in your cells. This thing actually functions probably better than the interstate over here, especially at rush hour. Okay? Anyhow, so you've got this highway, and there comes UPS carrying a sack of proteins to be delivered to various parts of the cell. It's not just one highway, quite a network of them. Okay? It's amazing. And now it comes in here, and because it's all put in the right place, in the right order, everything, when you get 32 of the right proteins, you're going to get energy, and that energy is going to let you live. Okay? That's what's going to keep the cell alive. And every one of your cells basically has this particular one. Okay? Plus piles of other motors. Okay? All right. When I looked at that, you know what I see? Design. I see design. I was at another university one time, and I just had gone through this, and I had one professor said, I came here to hear evidence of design. You haven't given me a bit of evidence for design. And if you don't give me evidence right now, I'm going to throw up all over these chairs in front of me. An engineer from the back of the auditorium shouted out, give him a bag. Okay? They can see it. Engineers know design when they see it, okay? There's not imperfection in that at all. In fact, Howard Berg from Harvard University talks about these molecular machines. He says these are the most efficient machines in the universe. Of course, he hadn't been all over the universe, but I understand his point. They're efficient. Howard Godsell says in one of these, or David Godsell, these are one of the wonders of the molecular world. All right? One of the wonders of it. And just amazing. So what answers do the evolutionists provide for all this? What are the answers? Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because what? It is not naturalistic. Do you think this guy is committed to the worldview of naturalism? Do you think he wants you committed to naturalism? Yes. All right. Do you think he's going to allow to have anybody else contradict his naturalistic worldview? Not if he can help it, right? Yeah, he don't want anybody to hear that. And that was actually in a court case in the state of Kansas, okay? All right. So, interesting. Here's one. Origin of de novo genes in human and chimpanzee. You know what that is? That is what are called orphan genes, okay? Basically, orphan genes. When you look, it says for 20 years, scientists have puzzled over strange, yet very common genomic phenomenon. In every genome, there are sets of genes which are unique to that particular species and not similar in other species, not homologous. What's he saying? Every species has their own unique set of genes. And they've been noting that for quite some time. And the apes will have a different set of ones. And within various apes, what? Even various types of apes, they have their own separate species. And they're definitely separate than human. They also find that honeybees have their own set of genes. And within different types of honeybees, whatever, they're different as well. Does that kind of might make you think that God created things after their own kind and things were uniquely created? That's what it says to me, okay? And then we do have, for instance, there's 600, at this one point, it's actually much more now, 634 of these in humans. No other species has that set, that species set. 700 in chimpanzees, okay? And that was only found in 4 organ tissues. That's before they started studying all the rest. What that really tells me is, guess what? God puts a dividing point between the various type of creatures that he has made. All right? And one thing does not change into the other. So the idea of naturalism, we'll have to say everything happens strictly by accidents. All right? It doesn't fit with some of those data. It doesn't fit with all the beautiful design we've been seeing. Naturalism will say there was a Big Bang explosion. Somehow or another, life accidentally evolved, even though we have no proof of it whatsoever. Okay? And then that cell ended up becoming humans, all that. And people are changed this idea of naturalism. That's why I keep saying evolutionary naturalism is a belief system. And it's posing as though it is science. All right? I'm going to stop right there. I think Jonathan will be happy if I do. All right, but I'm going to take questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave and Mary Jo. We're just getting warmed up.
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave would actually speak to you guys till 9, 10 o'clock at night if I would let him, but
Well,
I don't
he,
let
he
him.
was going to drag me out if I didn't quit after we didn't quit
told
after an hour.
I told him I had this giant hook like a Moses' staff. I would pull him off. So anyways, I hope that you found this insightful. And we still got 2 more talks that they'll be doing, actually 3 more. We got one tomorrow at 11:30 up in the Searing Room in 201. And that talk's going to be, what do fossils say about evolution? And then we'll be looking on Thursday night. We'll be right back here at 7 o'clock, same time. We'll be looking at geology. Who's the hero of the plot, okay? Time, water, or catastrophe. So you'll be looking at Noah's flood, I believe, in that one. And just the
We're going to
evidence of-
give the amazing geologic, archaeological, and cultural evidence that there was a worldwide flood as described in the biblical record called Noah's flood.
Excellent. And so, anyway, so we got, please take time to invite more your friends. Come on out for the other talks, and let's keep getting the word out. And then they will be speaking on Wednesday night at our Wednesday night worship service on 104 Rita Road. That flyer is on the table, the little yellow one there, if you want to catch them on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, okay? And there's an address on there and some contact information in case you, or my contact information is on here if you want to find out how to get there, or if you need a ride, we can get you one, okay? And so with that, I'm going to just turn it back over to Dave and Mary Jo. Mary Jo, why don't you come on up here and we'll hook you up with the mic. And that way they can field your questions. So why don't you come in, Joe?
There we go.
I tell you, it's not often you get a geologist and a biologist married together. You know, this is a miracle.
Yeah, I keep talking about how all that horrible green biology covers up all of my wonderful rocks. And all those layers. You can't even see a canyon from some of those places.
Hey,
Who's the first one who wants to give a question? Just any thoughts? Yeah.
Quick question. Can we prove that the Earth is more than 10,000 years? Can you disapprove that, actually?
can you prove that the Earth is not more than 10,000 years old?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Why would I want to prove it?
I think he's asking more like,
I know. What's the age of the Earth?
what's the age of
There are tremendous amount of evidences that I could present that'll give you the age of the Earth in terms of thousands of years, not millions of years, okay? But every one of those methods are going to rely on various assumptions, just like the radioactive decay dating methods that rely on assumptions, a page and a half of them that have to be true in order to make radioactive decay dating an accurate method. And the only way I can prove that radioactive decay dating is wrong is to date a rock of known age, because we're always dating rocks of unknown age, correct? How do you know if you're right or wrong? So date a rock of known age, like when a recent lava flow cools, now time t equals 0 is set. Let's wait a few years. Then, 30 years later, let's take a date. That was done at Mount St. Helens, by the way. In 1980, it erupted. And a short time after that, a recent volcanic dome built up within the crater. They dated the recent volcanic lava dome. It should have given a date of about 30 years. The minimum date was 340,000 years, up to 2.8 million years. Something's wrong. Yeah. But that's done several times now, and they're getting the similar results, okay? And that tells me I can't really rely on them to give me accurate dates of rocks of unknown age if they're not working on rocks of known age, okay? Now, as far as dating to be able to tell for sure how old something is, I'm going to have a different method, okay? That doesn't involve a whole bunch of assumptions. And now I might give an example. Jonathan, how old are you?
I'm 60 years old.
Prove it.
I got a birth certificate.
That's just a piece of paper. I want scientific evidence.
You could cut me in half and see the rings like that.
Yep, that's right.
That might be a scientific. Yeah, okay. I thought you were going to say, ask my mom. She was there. But that would be eyewitness reports. And if I keep insisting on a scientific method, he won't have one without killing himself. But even then, people don't have growth rings like that. Okay? Not like a tree.
No, but you think
But,
about it,
go ahead.
where do you have a historical method that does have eyewitness reports and that does have some kind of a documentation. That's what the Bible claims to have, and it shows the genealogies, and very precise genealogies, in fact. Historical record is much more reliable than these so-called scientific evidences that give you the wrong results on things of known age. And so we look at, you net all those up, and you get somewhere around 6,000, maybe up to 10,000, but you're not going to get millions and millions of years.
Right.
We have another question online, and the person is asking, how specifically does creation happen in the physical sense?
Say it again.
How specifically does creation happen in a physical sense?
How does creation happen in a physical sense?
In a physical sense.
Here you come into a philosophical debate, don't you? Creation happens, we believe, by a supernatural, intelligent designer, a creator. And we do not see evidence of creation being able to create itself. And so it requires intelligence. Just like if you know that the chair you're sitting on had to have some human being or somebody intelligent create that chair, right? It didn't happen just by the molecules coming together and aggregating into that form over many, many years, turning into a chair. We recognize the results. We recognize what we see as observations of intelligent design. And so we can't give you a physical means by which it happened because we believe there's an intelligent designer. Now, we see that all the time in things that humans have made. We recognize design. But, no one was there to watch the creation in the beginning, and yet the biblical account gives us a record of that creation. And we believe, and we don't apologize for that kind of faith. We believe in this designer who designed everything from the very beginning, as he says in Genesis. He gave us a record of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. All we could say is things look so complicated, they must have been designed. We could say that by just studying biology. The point, though, that, if we say, well, we believe in a creator, otherwise people end up believing in what? Mutation, natural selection, processes occurring naturally over millions of years. That's why we say neither one can scientifically prove the age of the earth or the origin of what happened. And anytime you're going to run into a place where you have to exercise faith, right? Now, we had a student one time tell us, I don't exercise faith. I believe in objectivity. I have to see everything objectively.
I operate only on science, he said.
That's what he told us. And we said to him, oh, if that's the case, then this morning, before you take a drink of water, you had to take it into the chemistry lab and you had to test it to be sure it was pure enough to drink, right? And that somebody didn't poison it overnight. Nobody can operate without faith. We drive down the road. We're operating on faith, aren't we? That other driver's not texting or something.
Yeah.
It requires faith.
I usually assume he is.
Yeah, that's probably a better assumption. You believe
Yeah.
that they are.
Ready for the swerve.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's right. And that's we call driving defensively, right? But yes, so we can't prove creation scientifically and we can't prove evolution scientifically. So it comes down to which faith fits the facts best. And to me, as a biologist, the complexity of life, not just that it's complex, but the interrelationships of parts within living systems indicates a creative design, not random chance events. Now, other people believe in random chance events. I find that to be now I do. I used to believe in that. But now I look at that and I go, there's no way that random chance events could come up with a structure as complex as a human brain. And we keep finding more and more. The more research that's done, the more complex we find out things are in our bodies. Like he was showing you those motors and the molecular motors.
But even to get a protein, I mean, our natural processes going to produce that protein. I calculated it one time, and while I was teaching a university statistics course, and we decided to calculate that in class. What's the probability of getting one simple protein by accident? Just one string of beads, all the right colors in the right spot.
Small one.
A small one. We're not talking about the great big one. You have chains of 1,000, 4,000 amino acids or beads, all in a nice line, and they have to be perfectly situated in the right order or it's not working. What's the probability of getting a small one? We calculated it in class. We said it was one chance in the number 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, well, 260 times. You can only put 10 times 10 times 10, 84 times total number of marbles into the entire known universe. Okay? And so it's like taking somebody's favorite blue marble and hiding it in a universe filled totally with green marbles. And then putting them in a spaceship, blindfolding them, you hide it and you say, I hit your marble, okay? And what's the chance they're going to find that blue marble in the universe filled with green marbles?
By accident. No
By
fair
accident.
praying.
Thank you. No further. If that person could find that marble, not once, and I hide it again, not twice, if he could find it 3 times in a row, that would be 100 million times easier than making one simple protein, or more likely than one simple protein. And in the end of that class, I said, I don't know what they teach you about these kind of odds in biology, but in statistics, we call that zero. Years later, I've had students come up to me and say, I remember that lecture. That was just a piece of one lecture. That was kind of interesting.
And 5 minutes after
Oh,
he
yeah.
gave that lecture, he heard from the department chairman came into the classroom and says, I hear you're preaching religion in the classroom. He's going, this isn't religion, this is statistics. Let me show you what I showed him. And Dave went through the calculations, and then he said, now, is that religion? And this head of the department said, no, it isn't, but you better stop it because this creation evolution issue is touchy on this campus. Mm-hmm. And then his contract wasn't renewed at that university. So you have a question?
Yeah, I had one question. The scientific community states that we were one eukaryotic cell, and before a photogenetic bacterium fused with the cell, and then it divided us between
Do you mind
plants
repeat it?
humans. So like between having plants and humans, right? And my question is, if they're saying that's the case, then how does since it's one cell, where did the bacteria work?
Hey, where did you get the first cell, right? I mean,
Kind of repeat that so that the people out there can hear.
the question is, the theory goes back. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. I'm going to just say that
No, not
the
everything.
theory is you go back to one cell that came into existence randomly, right? How did you get that cell? That's exactly the point. You can't even get a protein by accident. And you need thousands and thousands of proteins to have living systems.
Yeah.
And it takes proteins to get DNA, and it takes DNA to get proteins. So just getting the proteins together, like he was just giving you statistics for, is impossible. And so how do you get to that first cell in the first place?
And not only that, you have one other step. You've got to have the assembly plant. That consists of 300 proteins to make a protein. Okay? And you've got highways out of protein. And you understand that this is even vastly more complex than the simplistic way I presented it.
So this is why we say it takes a lot of faith to believe in evolution. What is the faith of evolution? I mean, it's faith in time, in chance, and natural processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the faith of a creationist? We have faith in a powerful, intelligent, wise creator God who is revealed in his word and who reveals himself to mankind as a God who loves us and wants to have fellowship with us. So in the end, you're going to have to exercise faith one way or the other, because nobody was there to watch it.
That other question that I was looking at or hearing before was, do we have physical evidence of that creation? Well, look around this room. Okay? You have evidence in every one of you, the almighty creator God. Okay?
Yeah, I think you've said this before that, if you could elaborate on the complexity of a cell.
Yeah.
That one cell has enough information to fill a whole library.
Oh, yeah. Well, just on the DNA molecule, right there, a DNA molecule, it fits inside of a cell. But if you would string that out, it'd be about this long. About that long. And it is tightly wrapped up together inside of a cell. Okay? It's absolutely amazing to see that. And there's so much information that can be stored on the DNA molecule that you can put the entire Library of Congress books on that one DNA strand. Now what they're trying to do is using the DNA as a very sophisticated computer storage system. Okay? That's where engineering is in computers is going right now. In fact, they've already have done it. The problem is they can get it there, but the retrieval is much more difficult. But God knew what he was doing.
You had a question.
Actually, you kind of already answered my question already, but I guess I could still ask it, which is that at the most basic level, because I know they'll be talking about the one cell as opposed to start it all. But if you were to, both of you, this question for both of you, to imagine the simplest possible organism that could ever exist and be functional and survive in any environment, how many different proteins would you need for that? And then I guess basically the second part to that would be like after you get all those proteins, I'll put it this way, after you get those proteins, how many different things or objects do you need to just put them together correctly? Just for the most basic possible way.
Boy, once you get all the proteins, how many would that be, first of all? And how many other items would be necessary to even make everything work together in order to have something alive? That's a very good question. The only answer, since I have not calculated all of that, okay, I just know there's a lot more to life than just putting the right proteins together. But I do know that there was an atheist and agnostic decided to calculate the probability of a whole cell. Okay, just the whole cell. And the cell is like a city, okay? What's the probability of the whole cell And they figured it out, an atheist and agnostic, and they did their calculations, came back, and they ended up with a number. One chance in 10 times 10, 40,000 times. They said, according to Sir Fred Hoyle and Sir Wick Ramaching, they ended up coming up with the idea that it'd be more likely for a tornado. You're really familiar with those in Minnesota, aren't you? More likely for a tornado to sweep through a junkyard and out of the debris produce a Boeing 747 aircraft. They said there must be a God. There must be a God. That's what their calculations showed. So did they run out and buy a Bible to find out about God?
Nope.
No. The article said they were actually interviewed in this article. The article said, we are still looking for a way around our conclusions. They know it's not going to work. So you see, it's a whole lot more complex than just getting a string of proteins. Yeah. Okay.
It's a big jump. That does bring up the idea, though, is why? Why would they say we're still looking for a way around it? Why not instead say we want to know this creator? How can we get to know the creator? What can we learn about the creator? What can we learn about our own life in relationship to a creator? But you see, so many people don't want their creator because that means we become accountable. That means we're not God ourselves. And so that means we're accountable to this creator. And people oftentimes, they don't want to be accountable. Now, most people will not admit that, but it is at a base level. I had a professor come down to Northern Illinois University one time, and he came up to me and he was talking to me about the Bible and about the evidence and so on. And he said to me, somebody gave him a Bible, a red letter edition, with the words of Jesus written in red. And he said, I kind of like Jesus as a man. He said, but I can't buy this divinity stuff, this God stuff. And I asked him, why not? And he said to me out of his very mouth, he said, because I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I told him, thank you, you are being honest. Now, this man was a law professor. He went in and he listened to the lecture. And afterwards, I went to him and I asked him, I said, I find it really interesting. You're a law professor. And you don't want anybody to tell you what to do. Isn't that what law is all about? He says, yeah, I don't like that either. But he was honest. He knew what his block was.
Yeah.
And we got information later that I really believe that man submitted his life to God.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ later on, because he was an honest seeker.
Yeah.
Some people, though, to put the block there, even they won't consider.
So I really like what you said about the inaccuracies of radioactive dating techniques, how inaccurate they are. Could you tell me if there are about inaccuracies of other techniques, like so you're a geologist, right? So plate tectonics. So like people say the formation of landforms show like the earth has been around for long for those landforms to be formed because the plates move at such a slow rate. The earth must have been around for like millions of years for those landforms to be formed. Are there like any inaccuracies about like theory for radioactive dating?
Okay, so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you want to know about, are there inaccuracies with the plate tectonics theories taking millions and millions of years?
For that particular one, it is a matter of assumptions. Like, for instance, I believe there is tectonic activity happening, and it has happened in the past. But to figure out what's happened over 300 million years is going to be hard to say. Okay? And I don't care what we clock it as, just write a little bit every year. And by the way, I just read an article yesterday that says that the rate that they believe these continents are separating, the amount, how fast the plate tectonics are going, is slowing down. Just within the amount of research time, they're saying it's slowing down. Okay, now let's take just what they thought was the present speed. Oh yeah, long time for it to move all the way from across the ocean, right? All right, but let's look at it this way. In Colorado, we have wonderful mountains for skiing, okay? And let's suppose you're sitting there in the wonderful lodge, having a great day skiing, watching skiers. You're sipping on your hot chocolate, you're enjoying the warmth on the inside, and you just happen to take a nice sip of your hot chocolate, and you see a skier, all of a sudden his head just got buried in the snowbank because he took a big tumble, evidently, but you didn't see him do that. All you are seeing is the last imperceptible motion, virtually, as he buried his head into that snowbank and came to a stop. Wasn't moving very fast at that point, but you look at those long ski tracks all the way down that hill, and you say, it must have taken them at least 1.5 million years to get from the top to right here at that rate that I've just observed. You see? You didn't see what happened before, did you? And so that's part of the problem with plate tectonics. We tried to analyze it based upon what we see right now. What if it was going faster? All of a sudden, you've got it. You know, all he has to do is move 4 or 5 inches in a year, or 4 or 5, maybe 4. Yeah, or 4 or 5. Let's say not inches. Let's say inches in an hour. Say, okay, that's not very fast to move 4 inches in an hour. But in that case, you're only talking about a few thousand years for the continents to go to their present position. Okay? As you see, that's very important. But there is a model in geology. I'm going to show a picture of it on Thursday that kind of is a good diagram that shows what would happen if the continental plate, which was going underneath the oceanic plate going underneath the continental plate, what if it would just sped up a little bit? What's going to happen? It's going to generate heat, a little extra heat, which will make the mantle more fluid at that point for it to go even faster. And that'll generate even more heat. And then it goes faster, more heat. And so like a conveyor belt, all of that particular seafloor will be subducted underneath the continent. That's called runaway subduction. Once you get it started, it can't be stopped until all of the seafloor, all the old seafloor is basically subducted underneath the continental plate. How long does that take? Well, Dr. John Baumgartner, who was considered the top geophysicist in the world for a long time, he basically showed from his calculations using the big Cray computers, those are the great big ones that they use for major predictive things, a whole bunch of others. He said the whole thing would take only a year. 1 year. Whew. That's moving pretty quickly, isn't it? Okay, and you can see that's going to then produce various effects that would then definitely affect what we now call flood type of conditions. Okay? It's going to cause tremendous amount of atmospheric water. We got the ocean basin that'll actually be rising. And the reason, because of the big hole. And also, fresh lava is lighter than old dense stuff. And the shows, in his calculation, shows that the seafloor would rise and the ocean level would be 7,000 feet higher within that year than it is presently. Now, what does that do to Minnesota? You're in the water, right? Most of Colorado is also, even though we have high mountains, most of Colorado is going to be underwater too. Okay?
Go to Nepal.
Huh?
Time to go to Nepal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But at the time of the flood, Nepal probably wasn't as high as it is now. Do you realize Mount Everest is still rising? Not that much, but it is still rising. So if you have an aspiration, Jonathan, to go climb Mount Everest, you better do it next year. It's getting higher every year.
Yep.
And we're getting older every year.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that does. Okay, so you see what I'm trying to say. One of the flood mechanisms has to do with that's runaway subduction. It is a viable thing, explains a lot of what we see, but there's a problem with the time frame. Okay, how fast was it going? Are we just looking at a little tiny bit, or was it going pretty fast? Okay? So,
And that's always the trouble when you try to project into the past based
Yeah.
on the rate today.
uh-huh.
You don't know. It could have been going faster or slower in the past. If it's based on the rate we see today, you know, our
Yeah.
calculations could be very wrong. If you looked at a child and they're growing a lot faster than we are, right? A
No.
little kid, if you start from the time they're a little kid, even till when they hit puberty, and if they were to continue that rate of growth, you know, they'd all be monster size
yeah.
compared to what we are.
And do you realize that a baby in the womb, there is a particular point in the womb that he or she is growing at such a rate that if there weren't controls and different things that enter in, at the time of the birth would have weighed a whopping 11 tons. Poor mom.
Poor mom.
Do we have any further questions?
More questions?
All right. Well, thank you, Dave and Mary Jo.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
Good to be with you.
Yeah.
Tell your friends tomorrow, fossils.
And then,
Yeah, they'll be here. If you want to ask them any more questions, you can do it after we shut down the video here. And just hang out if you'd like. And then make sure you check out the table over there. We got some free Bibles, and there's a little information on their ministry and what they do, and a few other things. So just check that out. Appreciate y'all coming tonight.
Jonathan, did you mention to them that we were given a special session over there at the campus house
I mentioned
on
that
dinosaurs?
the front end.
Okay, good enough. That'll be on dinosaurs tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow evening's on dinosaurs, and that will be at 104 Rita Road. Take that yellow flyer on the table if you want to know where that is at. Okay? All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you much.
right?
Yeah.